The rain had just stopped when David stepped out of his black sedan in front of the Grand Royal Hotel. Water dripped from the golden awning above the entrance, and the doorman in his crisp uniform hurried to open the heavy glass doors. David adjusted his tailored navy suit jacket and checked his watch. He was exactly on time for his meeting with potential investors, who had specifically requested this location. The lobby was everything you'd expect from a five-star hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Marble floors reflected the warm lighting, and expensive artwork decorated the walls. The scent of fresh flowers, mixed with leather and wood polish, created an atmosphere of luxury that had attracted wealthy guests for decades. David approached the front desk where a woman in her 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair was typing on her computer. Her name tag read Patricia, and she wore the hotel's signature burgundy blazer. She looked up as he approached, and he noticed her smile fade slightly. "Good evening," David said politely. "I have a reservation under the name David Johnson. I'm here for a business meeting." Patricia's fingers moved across the keyboard, but her eyes kept glancing up at him. After what seemed longer than necessary, she frowned and shook her head. "I'm sorry, but I don't see any reservation under that name." David pulled out his phone and scrolled to his email confirmation. "Here's my confirmation number. I booked this 3 days ago through your Platinum member program." He turned the screen toward her, showing the official hotel email with all the details clearly visible. Patricia barely glanced at the phone. "Our system shows nothing. Are you sure you booked with us and not another hotel?" Her tone had become noticeably cooler. "I'm quite certain," David replied, keeping his voice calm despite feeling confused. "Could you check again?" "The reservation was made through my assistant, and I received this confirmation directly from your reservations department." "Sir, I've checked twice now. There's simply no reservation." Patricia's voice carried a hint of irritation, as if David was wasting her time. "Perhaps you made a mistake with the dates." David felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. He'd built his business empire by staying calm under pressure, and this wouldn't be different. "The reservation is for tonight, and I have the confirmation right here." "Could I speak with your manager?" Patricia exchanged a quick look with another staff member behind the desk. "I am the front desk manager, and I'm telling you there's no room available under your name or any other name tonight. We're completely booked." As if on cue, a middle-aged white couple approached the desk next to David. They didn't have a reservation, they explained to Patricia's colleague, but were hoping for a room for the night. Within minutes, they were being handed key cards and directions to the elevator. David watched this interaction with growing disbelief. "Excuse me," he said to Patricia, "but these guests just walked in without a reservation and you found them a room. How is that possible if you're completely booked?" Patricia's face hardened. "That was our last available room, and it had just become available due to a cancellation." She turned to her computer screen, clearly trying to dismiss him. The general manager, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair, appeared from behind the desk. His name tag read Mr. Hayes, and he carried himself with the authority of someone who'd been in charge for many years. "Is there a problem here?" Hayes asked, looking directly at David. David explained the situation calmly, showing his confirmation email and explaining about his business meeting. Hayes listened with a neutral expression, occasionally nodding. "I see the confusion," Hayes finally said. "However, our records show no such reservation. Perhaps there was an error with your booking agent, or maybe you meant to book at one of our sister properties across town." "No," David said firmly. "My assistant specifically booked this hotel because my business partners requested it. They're already upstairs waiting for me in the restaurant." Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I understand your frustration, Mr. He paused, waiting for David to repeat his name. "Johnson." "David Johnson. Mr. Johnson, I wish I could help, but we simply don't have any rooms available. However, I can recommend several excellent hotels in the area that might better suit your needs." The way he emphasized "better suit" made David's stomach turn. "What exactly do you mean by that?" David asked, his voice still controlled but with an edge. "Simply that we want all our guests to be comfortable, and unfortunately we can't accommodate you tonight." David looked around the lobby. Other guests were checking in smoothly, their luggage being whisked away by bellhops. The bar area was busy but not packed. Nothing suggested the hotel was at capacity. 2 security guards had quietly positioned themselves near the front desk, trying to look casual, but clearly ready to intervene if needed. David noticed them immediately. In his years of business dealings, he'd learned to read situations quickly. "I see," David said quietly. He pulled out his phone and began recording. "Could you repeat that for me? About how you can't accommodate me despite my confirmed reservation?" Hayes stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording and leave the premises. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have to involve security." "A disturbance?" David's voice remained calm, but inside he was burning with anger and humiliation. "I'm a paying customer with a confirmed reservation, asking for the room I booked. How is that a disturbance?" "You're making other guests uncomfortable," Patricia interjected, though David noticed most guests in the lobby weren't even paying attention to their conversation. David looked at both of them, understanding completely what was happening. He'd faced this kind of treatment before, but never so blatantly at such an upscale establishment. The realization hit him like a physical blow, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. "I understand perfectly now," he said, putting his phone away. "You're saying that despite my confirmed reservation, despite my membership status, and despite having rooms available, you cannot accommodate me tonight." Hayes nodded. "That's correct. I'm sure you'll find more appropriate accommodations elsewhere." The word appropriate hung in the air like a challenge. David felt every eye in the lobby on him now. Other guests had begun to notice the tension, some watching with curiosity, others with obvious discomfort. David reached into his jacket and pulled out his business card. He handed it to Hayes, who barely glanced at it before sliding it into his pocket without reading it. "You might want to keep that," David said quietly. "You'll want to remember this conversation." He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The doorman, who had avoided eye contact throughout the exchange, hurried to open the door for him. As David stepped back into the cool evening air, he heard Patricia's voice behind him, speaking to one of her colleagues. "Some people just don't understand where they belong." David stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the traffic pass by. His business meeting would have to be moved. His partners would understand when he explained what happened. But this wasn't about one inconvenient evening. This was about something much bigger. He pulled out his phone and made a call to his assistant. "Cancel the meeting and reschedule for tomorrow. Same hotel. And get me everything you can find on the Grand Royal Hotel. I want to know who owns it, their financial situation, and their complete business history. I want it by morning." As his car pulled up to take him back to his office, David took one last look at the hotel's elegant facade. The golden letters spelling out Grand Royal Hotel seemed to mock him in the streetlight. But by tomorrow evening, he thought, things might look very different indeed. David sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, the city lights twinkling below him like scattered diamonds. The humiliation from earlier that evening still burned in his chest, but his mind was already working on something bigger. He'd learned long ago that anger without action was worthless. Tonight, his anger would fuel something that could change everything. His assistant, Catherine, knocked and entered with a thick folder and her laptop. She'd worked for David for 8 years and knew when he was serious about something. The way he'd called her at 9 in the evening asking for a complete investigation into a hotel told her this was one of those times. "I have everything you asked for," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "And, David, what I found is worse than you might expect." Catherine opened the folder and spread out papers across his desk. Financial statements, newspaper clippings, legal documents, and employee records created a mosaic of information that told a disturbing story. "The Grand Royal Hotel has been in the Hayes family for 3 generations, she began. Robert Hayes, the current general manager, inherited it from his father 15 years ago. Since then, they've had 7 discrimination lawsuits filed against them. 7, David. And those are just the ones that made it to court." David picked up one of the legal documents. A family from Atlanta had sued after being told the hotel was full, only to watch 3 white families check in immediately after them. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. "What about their finances?" David asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Catherine pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. "They're groaning. Occupancy rates have dropped 30% in the last 2 years. They've had to let go of half their staff, and they're behind on property taxes. The building needs major renovations they can't afford, and their insurance premiums have skyrocketed because of all the lawsuits. She showed him photographs from online reviews, peeling paint in guest rooms, broken fixtures, outdated furniture that hadn't been replaced in decades. The hotel's public image had been declining along with its bank account. But here's the interesting part, Catherine continued, pulling out another set of documents. They've been quietly looking for buyers for the past 6 months. 3 different real estate firms have the listing, and they're asking for way more than the property is worth. David studied the financial projections. The Hayes family was asking for $45 million for a property that recent appraisals valued at no more than $30 million, and that was being generous given its condition and reputation. Who else is interested? David asked. 2 hotel chains looked at it and walked away after seeing the legal history. One real estate developer made a lowball offer that the Hayes family rejected. As of today, they have no serious buyers and they're getting desperate. Catherine handed him another folder, this one filled with employee testimonials and reviews from job websites. David read through them, his anger growing with each page. A housekeeper named Maria wrote about being passed over for promotion repeatedly, despite having more experience than newer white employees who advanced quickly. A front desk clerk described being told to be more selective about which guests received certain amenities. A maintenance worker revealed that complaints from minority guests were often filed away without being addressed. There's more, Catherine said quietly. I found a private Facebook group for former employees. They share stories about what really goes on there. David, the pattern of discrimination isn't just against guests. It's built into how they treat their own workers. She showed him screenshots from the group, names blurred out for privacy. Story after story of qualified minority employees being overlooked, complained about by certain long-term staff members, or pushed out through impossible work conditions. One post particularly caught his attention. A former restaurant server wrote, "They told us in training to pay special attention to our kind of guests and to make sure others didn't feel too comfortable. When I asked what that meant, my manager just winked and said I'd figure it out." David leaned back in his chair, processing everything. This wasn't just about one bad evening or even a few isolated incidents. The Grand Royal Hotel had created a system designed to exclude people who looked like him, and they'd been getting away with it for years. What about the current ownership structure? He asked. Catherine pulled up a corporate filing. It's privately held by the Hayes Family Trust. Robert Hayes has 60% ownership. His sister Helen has 30% and their mother Eleanor has the remaining 10%. But here's the thing. They all need to agree on any major financial decisions and they're not getting along. She showed him newspaper articles from the local business journal. The Hayes siblings had been fighting publicly about the hotel's direction. Helen wanted to sell and invest in other properties. Robert wanted to hold on and try to restore the family legacy. Their mother was caught in the middle, and the legal bills from their disputes were adding to their financial problems. They're vulnerable, David said, more to himself than to Catherine. Very vulnerable. And David, there's something else. I made some calls to people in the hospitality industry. The Grand Royal's reputation is so bad that experienced hotel managers won't even consider working there. They can't attract quality staff, which makes their service even worse, which drives away more guests. Catherine pulled out one final document. This is their cash flow projection for the next 6 months. If things don't change soon, they'll be forced into bankruptcy by Christmas. David stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, the Grand Royal Hotel sat like a monument to prejudice and poor management. In a few hours, Robert Hayes would probably be in his office, congratulating himself on keeping out another undesirable guest, completely unaware that his world was about to change. Catherine, I want you to call our acquisition team first thing in the morning, David said, turning back to face her. But I don't want my name anywhere near this deal. Set up a shell company, use offshore accounts if necessary, but I want to make an offer they can't refuse. How much are you thinking? Catherine asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer would surprise her. $50 million. Cash. Immediate closing. Catherine's eyes widened. David, that's $5 million more than they're asking and probably $20 million more than it's actually worth. I'm not buying it for its value, David replied. I'm buying it for what it represents. And Catherine, I want the deal structured so that I can take control immediately, but I want them to keep their current management in place for the transition. You want Robert Hayes to stay on as general manager? David smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Oh, yes. I want him to be there when I walk through those doors tomorrow. I want him to meet his new boss face to face. Catherine gathered up the papers, understanding the assignment. What about the staff who've been part of the problem? We'll deal with them appropriately. But first, I want to see their faces when they realize what happened. I want them to understand that their actions have consequences. As Catherine prepared to leave, David called out to her. And Catherine, I want you to invite some members of the press to be there tomorrow evening. Tell them I have a major announcement about diversity in the hospitality industry. Don't give them details, but make sure they know it's something they won't want to miss. After Catherine left, David remained at his window for a long time. He thought about all the times he'd faced discrimination, from his childhood in a poor neighborhood to his early days building his business empire. He'd learned to use those experiences as fuel, but tonight felt different. Tonight he had the power to do something about it. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his friend Jerome, a civil rights attorney who'd been fighting discrimination cases for 20 years. Jerome, it's David. I know it's late, but I need to ask you something. If someone bought a business specifically to address systematic discrimination, what would be the most effective way to create lasting change? The conversation that followed would help shape what happened next at the Grand Royal Hotel, and David knew that by this time tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. The morning sun cast long shadows across David's office as he reviewed the final acquisition documents. His legal team had worked through the night to structure the deal exactly as he'd requested. Every detail had been carefully planned, from the shell company that would, make the purchase to the timeline that would allow him to return to the Grand Royal Hotel exactly 24 hours after his humiliation. Catherine entered with coffee and a satisfied expression. It's done, she announced. Horizon Investment Group, our shell company, officially submitted the offer at 7 this morning. $50 million cash with a 24-hour acceptance deadline. David looked up from the contracts. And they have no idea who's behind Horizon Investment Group? None at all. Our lawyers presented it as an international investment consortium looking to expand their hospitality portfolio in major American cities. Robert Hayes thinks he's dealing with foreign money that doesn't understand the American market. The irony wasn't lost on David. Hayes had tried to exclude him based on assumptions about who belonged in his hotel, and now those same prejudices were blinding him to what was really happening. Catherine's phone buzzed. She answered and spoke quietly for a moment before hanging up with a grin. That was our attorney. Hayes called an emergency family meeting for 9 a.m. He's apparently very excited about the offer. David imagined the scene at the hotel. Robert Hayes, the man who'd refused him a room less than 12 hours ago, was probably celebrating what he thought was his salvation. The financial pressure had been building for months, and this unexpected windfall would seem like a miracle. What about the due diligence? David asked. They waived most of it, Catherine replied. When you're offering $5 million over asking price with immediate cash payment, desperate sellers don't ask too many questions. Our lawyers are handling the basic property inspections and title searches, but Hayes is pushing to close as quickly as possible. David's phone rang. It was his friend Jerome, the civil rights attorney he'd spoken with the night before. David, I've been thinking about our conversation, Jerome said. If you're really planning what I think you're planning, you need to be very careful about how you handle this. You want to create change, not just revenge. I understand the difference, David replied. This isn't about hurting anyone. It's about making sure this never happens. Again, good. Because I've been doing some research of my own on the Grand Royal. There are employees there who've been fighting against the discrimination from the inside. A housekeeping supervisor named Rosa Martinez filed complaints with HR 3 times about unequal treatment. A young front desk clerk named Kev in Thompson was written up for being too friendly to minority guests. These people deserve protection, not punishment. David made notes as Jerome spoke. The plan had always been about justice, not just satisfaction, and that meant protecting the innocent while holding the guilty accountable. By 10 a.m., Catherine received word that the Hayes family had accepted the offer. Robert Hayes had called the lawyers personally, barely able to contain his excitement. He'd agreed to every term, including the unusual clause that allowed the new ownership to take control immediately upon closing. He asked about meeting the new owners, Catherine reported. Our lawyers told him that Horizon Investment Group prefers to work through intermediaries initially, but that key decision-makers would be visiting the property soon. David smiled. How soon? This evening. The paperwork will be finalized by 5 p.m., which means you'll officially own the Grand Royal Hotel exactly 24 hours after they turned you away. The rest of the day moved quickly. David's acquisition team coordinated with banks to transfer the funds. His human resources department prepared new employment contracts and policy documents. His public relations team reached out to local news outlets, hinting at a major story about changes in the hospitality industry. At 2 p.m., David received an update that made him pause. The hotel's employee Facebook group that Catherine had discovered was buzzing with rumors. Someone had posted that new ownership was coming, and the responses revealed just how deep the problems ran. Some longtime employees were worried about losing their jobs. Others hoped that change might finally address the hostile work environment they'd endured for years. A few posts suggested that certain staff members were already updating their resumes, sensing that their behavior might not be tolerated under new management. One post stood out. Rosa Martinez, the housekeeping supervisor Jerome had mentioned, wrote, "Maybe now things will finally be fair for everyone who works here. Some of us have been waiting a long time for someone to care about doing the right thing." David forwarded the post to Jerome. "These are the people we need to protect and promote," he wrote. As the afternoon progressed, David received regular updates on the closing process. The Hayes family's lawyers were pushing everything through as quickly as possible, treating the sale like an emergency evacuation from a sinking ship. At 4 p.m., Catherine brought David a final folder. "These are the new policies and procedures for the hotel. Zero-tolerance discrimination policy, mandatory diversity training for all staff, updated hiring practices, and a clear complaint process with external oversight." David reviewed each document carefully. Every policy had been crafted with input from civil rights experts and employment lawyers. The goal was to create a system that would prevent discrimination from taking root again. "What about the current staff?" David asked. "We've identified 12 employees who have been involved in discriminatory practices, including Robert Hayes and Patricia Norton from the front desk. They'll be terminated for cause as soon as you take control. The rest of the staff will be evaluated individually, with preference given to those who've been advocating for change." At 4:30, David's phone rang. It was one of the lawyers handling the closing. "Mr. Johnson, we have a problem," the lawyer said. "Robert Hayes is asking questions about why the new owners want to keep all current management in place temporarily. He's getting suspicious," David thought quickly. "Tell him that Horizon Investment Group believes in maintaining operational continuity during transitions. Emphasize that they want to observe current management practices before making any changes. Will that satisfy him? It doesn't matter if it satisfies him. In 30 minutes, his opinion won't matter anymore." At 5 p.m. exactly, Catherine walked into David's office with a single sheet of paper. "Congratulations," she said. "You now own the Grand Royal Hotel." David looked at the deed in his hands. His name was listed as the beneficial owner of Horizon Investment Group, which now held title to the property where he'd been humiliated just 24 hours earlier. "The press is assembling in the hotel lobby as we speak," Catherine reported. 3 local news crews, reporters from the Business Journal, and a freelancer who covers civil rights issues. Hayes thinks they're there to cover the sale as a business story. David stood and adjusted his tie. He was wearing the same navy suit he'd worn the night before, but this time he added something special, a pin from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People that Jerome had given him years earlier. "Are you ready?" Catherine asked. David looked out his window one last time at the city below. Somewhere out there, the Grand Royal Hotel sat waiting, its staff unaware that everything was about to change. Robert Hayes was probably preparing remarks for what he thought would be a routine press conference about new ownership. "I've been ready my whole life," David said. As they prepared to leave, David's phone buzzed with a text from Jerome. "Remember, this moment isn't just about you. It's about every person who's been turned away, overlooked, or made to feel unwelcome. Make it count," David replied. "Justice served with dignity. See you at the hotel." The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt longer than usual. David used the time to center himself. thinking about the speech he'd prepared and the changes that would begin tonight. By the time the elevator doors opened, he was ready to face the people who'd thought they could judge him by the color of his skin. The Grand Royal Hotel was about to learn what happened when you underestimated David Johnson. David stepped out of his car in front of the Grand Royal Hotel at exactly 6 p.m. 24 hours had passed since his humiliation, but this time everything was different. Catherine walked beside him, carrying a briefcase with ownership documents and termination letters. Behind them came Jerome and 2 other members of David's legal team. The hotel lobby buzzed with activity. News crews had set up cameras near the front desk, and reporters milled around with notepads and microphones. Robert Hayes stood near the entrance to the restaurant, wearing his best suit and practicing what looked like prepared remarks. He had no idea he was about to become the star of a very different story than the one he'd planned. Patricia Norton was working at the front desk, the same position where she'd turned David away just 1 day earlier. She looked up as the group entered, and David saw her eyes widen with recognition. Her hand froze over her keyboard as she watched him approach with obvious confidence and purpose. "Excuse me?" David said to Patricia, his voice calm and professional. "I need to speak with your general manager immediately." Patricia's mouth opened and closed without sound. She looked around frantically as if searching for security or an escape route. He's busy with reporters right now." "I'm sure he'll want to make time for me," David replied. "Please tell him that David Johnson is here to see him. He'll remember me." While Patricia stammered into her phone, David noticed the other staff members beginning to take notice. A bellhop who'd been arranging luggage stopped to stare. The concierge looked confused. Word was spreading quickly through the lobby that something unusual was happening. Robert Hayes appeared from behind the restaurant entrance, his confident expression faltering the moment he saw David. The color drained from his face as he approached, clearly trying to figure out why the man he'd humiliated yesterday was back with lawyers and in front of news cameras. "Mr. Johnson," Hayes said uncertainly, "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "Is there something I can help you with?" David smiled pleasantly. "Actually, yes. There's quite a lot you can help me with. But first, I believe you have some reporters waiting to hear about your hotel's new ownership." Hayes looked confused. "Well, yes, but I don't see how that concerns you. We're announcing the sale to Horizon Investment Group." "That's perfect," David said, "because I'm here to meet the press as well. You see, I have some news about Horizon Investment Group that I think everyone will find very interesting." The reporters had begun to notice the commotion and were moving closer. Camera operators adjusted their equipment, sensing that something significant was about to happen. David could see questions forming on their faces as they tried to understand the connection between the well-dressed man and the hotel manager, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Hayes said, his voice rising slightly. "Are you here as a guest?" "Because as I explained yesterday, we don't have any availability." "Oh, I'm not here as a guest," David replied, reaching into Catherine's briefcase. "I'm here as the owner." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered. Hayes stared blankly as if David had spoken in a foreign language. Patricia dropped her pen, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet lobby. David pulled out the ownership documents and held them up for everyone to see. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I'm David Johnson, CEO of Johnson Enterprises and the beneficial owner of Horizon Investment Group. As of 5 p.m. today, I am the new owner of the Grand Royal Hotel." The lobby erupted. Cameras began rolling. Reporters shouted questions, and hotel staff stood frozen in shock. Hayes stumbled backward, catching himself against the front desk. "That's impossible," Hayes whispered. "Horizon Investment Group is an international consortium." "I'm what?" David asked, his voice cutting through the noise. I'm black." "Is that what you were going to say, Mr. Hayes?" The question silenced the room. Every reporter leaned in, understanding that they were witnessing something much bigger than a routine business announcement. David continued, his voice clear and steady. "Yesterday evening, I came to this hotel with a confirmed reservation. I was turned away by your staff despite having proof of my booking, and despite this hotel having available rooms. I was told to find more appropriate accommodations elsewhere. The treatment I received was discriminatory, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable." Hayes opened his mouth to protest, but David held up his hand. I have the entire interaction recorded, David said, pulling out his phone. But more importantly, I've spent the last 24 hours investigating this hotel's practices. What I found was a pattern of discrimination against both guests and employees that has been going on for years. He turned to address the cameras directly. 7 discrimination lawsuits in the past 5 years, countless complaints from employees about unequal treatment, a systematic culture of exclusion that has no place in modern business or decent society. Patricia tried to slip away from the front desk, but Jerome stepped forward with a folder in his hand. Ms. Norton, you'll want to stay for this. These are termination letters for you and several other employees who have participated in discriminatory practices. The reporter from the Civil Rights magazine stepped forward. Mr. Johnson, can you tell us exactly what happened yesterday? David nodded and began recounting the events in detail. He described the denial of his confirmed reservation, the obvious availability of rooms, the suggestion that he find more appropriate accommodations, and the positioning of security guards to intimidate him. As he spoke, Hayes grew increasingly agitated. Now wait just a minute, he interrupted. You can't just come in here and make these accusations. We were following our policies? Your policies? David asked. Are you saying it's your policy to deny confirmed reservations to black guests? To make assumptions about who belongs in your hotel based on the color of their skin? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Hayes realized he was trapped. Anything he said would either admit to discrimination or contradict his earlier actions. A reporter called out, Mr. Hayes, do you remember turning away Mr. Johnson yesterday? Hayes looked around desperately as if searching for an escape route. The hotel was full. The hotel wasn't full, David said calmly. I watched you give rooms to walk-in guests immediately after denying my confirmed reservation. And Patricia here told a colleague that some people just don't understand where they belong. Patricia's face went white. She hadn't realized David had heard her comment, and now it was being broadcast to news cameras. David turned back to the assembled reporters. This isn't just about one bad experience. This is about systemic discrimination that has been allowed to flourish in an industry where all people should be welcomed with dignity and respect. He gestured to Catherine, who stepped forward with another folder. Effective immediately, we're implementing new policies at the Grand Royal Hotel. 0 tolerance for discrimination, mandatory diversity training for all staff, and a complete review of our hiring and promotion practices. What about current management? A reporter asked. David looked directly at Hayes. Mr. Hayes, your employment is terminated immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck and benefits as required by law, but your decision-making authority at this hotel ends right now. Hayes's face turned red. You can't do this! My family has run this hotel for 3 generations. And for 3 generations, it appears, your family has created a culture of exclusion and discrimination, David replied. That ends today. Jerome stepped forward with security personnel David had arranged to be present. Mr. Hayes, Ms. Norton, you'll need to gather your personal belongings and leave the premises immediately. Security will escort you out. As Hayes and Patricia were led away, David addressed the remaining staff who had gathered in the lobby. Many looked scared, uncertain about their futures under new ownership. To the employees of the Grand Royal Hotel, David said, his voice carrying throughout the lobby, if you've been part of the problem, your time here is over. But if you've been doing your job with professionalism and respect for all guests, you have nothing to fear. In fact, those of you who have been overlooked or mistreated because of your race, gender, or background will find new opportunities for advancement. He paused, looking around the room. Rosa Martinez, our housekeeping supervisor, will be promoted to head of hotel operations. Kevin Thompson from the front desk will become our new guest services manager. These promotions go to people who have demonstrated the values we want to see in this hotel. The news crews captured every moment as David outlined his vision for the hotel's future. He spoke about diversity training, community partnerships, and a commitment to treating every guest with equal respect and dignity. As the press conference concluded, David stood in the same lobby where he'd been humiliated just 24 hours earlier. But now he stood as the owner, surrounded by employees who looked at him with respect and hope rather than suspicion and prejudice. The transformation had begun, and nothing would ever be the same at the Grand Royal Hotel. 6 months later, David stood in the renovated lobby of the Grand Royal Hotel, watching the morning bustle with satisfaction. The marble floors still gleamed, but now they reflected a different kind of activity. Guests of all backgrounds moved through the space with ease, greeted warmly by staff who genuinely smiled and meant it. Rosa Martinez approached with the daily operations report. In her new role as head of hotel operations, she'd transformed not just her own career but the entire culture of the workplace. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," she said with confidence that would have been unimaginable under the previous management. "Occupancy is at 92% and we have a waiting list for next weekend." David reviewed the numbers with amazement. The financial turnaround had exceeded even his optimistic projections. Within 3 months of the ownership change, the hotel had gone from struggling to survive to becoming one of the most sought-after accommodations in the city. "Any guest complaints?" David asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. 3 minor issues, all resolved within an hour," Rosa replied. "But Mr. Johnson, we received another letter from the mayor's office. They want to feature our diversity and inclusion program as a model for other businesses in the city." The recognition had been pouring in from unexpected places. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People had given the hotel an award for corporate transformation. The State Tourism Board had featured them in a campaign about welcoming hospitality. Most surprisingly, several other hotel chains had reached out asking for advice on implementing similar changes. Kevin Thompson joined them, carrying his tablet with the guest satisfaction scores. His promotion from front desk clerk to guest services manager had been one of David's first decisions, and it had paid off tremendously. "Mr. Johnson, our online reviews are averaging 4.5 stars now. 6 months ago, we were barely maintaining 2 stars. David scrolled through some of the recent reviews on Kevin's tablet. One guest wrote, "The staff here made us feel genuinely welcome from the moment we arrived. You can tell this hotel cares about treating every guest with respect." Another said, "Finally, a luxury hotel where the service matches the price tag, regardless of who you are." But it wasn't just the reviews that told the story of transformation. The employee satisfaction surveys showed an even more dramatic change. Staff turnover had dropped to almost 0. Productivity was up. And the workplace culture surveys revealed a complete reversal from the toxic environment that had existed before. Catherine approached with a visitor. "David, I'd like you to meet Dr. Angela Foster from the university. She's here about the scholarship program." David shook hands with the professor, who had come to discuss the Grand Royal Educational Foundation that David had established. The foundation provided full scholarships for minority students pursuing degrees in hospitality management, with guaranteed internships at the hotel. "Mr. Johnson, we have 47 students in the program now," Dr. Foster reported. "The response has been overwhelming. These young people are so motivated, knowing that there are real opportunities waiting for them in this industry." 3 scholarship recipients were currently working as paid interns at the hotel. David made it a point to mentor them personally, sharing lessons from his own journey, and ensuring they understood that their potential was limitless. As Dr. Foster left, David noticed a familiar face entering the lobby. It was Jerome, his civil rights attorney friend, but he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a group of about 15 people, all well-dressed and professional-looking. "David," Jerome called out, "I brought some colleagues who wanted to see what you've accomplished here. This is the quarterly meeting of the Civil Rights Lawyers Association, and they specifically asked to visit the Grand Royal." David greeted the group warmly. Many of them had been fighting discrimination cases for decades and had seen plenty of promises for change that never materialized. They'd come to see if this transformation was real or just good public relations. As Rosa and Kevin led tours of the hotel, David listened to the lawyers' questions and observations. They were impressed not just by the policies on paper, but by the genuine changes they could see in how staff interacted with guests and each other. One lawyer, an elderly woman who'd been fighting civil rights cases since the 1960s, pulled David aside. "Young man, I've seen a lot of companies make promises about change, but what you've done here goes deeper than policy. You've changed hearts and minds." Her words meant more to David than any business award could. This had never been just about profit or even personal satisfaction. It had been about proving that real change was possible when someone with power chose to use it responsibly. Later that afternoon, David received a call that made him smile. It was from another hotel owner in a different city, asking for advice on addressing discrimination complaints at his property. Word was spreading through the industry that the Grand Royal's approach actually worked, both morally and financially. As evening approached, David made his way to the hotel restaurant for a dinner meeting with potential investors in a new hotel project. The restaurant had been completely renovated, not just physically, but culturally. The diverse staff reflected the community they served, and the atmosphere was warm and welcoming to everyone. During dinner, one of the investors asked David what he'd learned from the Grand Royal experience. David considered the question carefully before answering. "I learned that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's also bad business," he said. "When you exclude people, you exclude their money, their talent, and their perspectives." The Grand Royal failed financially because it drove away customers and couldn't attract good employees. When we opened our doors to everyone, everything improved. But the business case, while important, wasn't the whole story. David thought about Patricia Norton, the former front desk manager who'd turned him away that first night. He'd heard through industry contacts that she'd struggled to find another hotel job. Her reputation had followed her, and other employers were reluctant to hire someone associated with discrimination scandals. Robert Hayes had fared even worse. The public nature of his termination had made him unemployable in the hospitality industry. He'd reportedly moved to another state and taken a job in an entirely different field. David felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but he understood that actions had consequences. As the dinner meeting concluded, David walked through the lobby one more time before heading home. The evening shift was just beginning, and he watched new guests check in smoothly, regardless of their race, age, or background. Rosa was training 2 new employees at the front desk, emphasizing the importance of treating every guest as a valued customer. Kevin was helping an elderly couple navigate the elevator. The security guard, a young black man who'd been promoted from part-time to full-time, was chatting pleasantly with a guest about local restaurants. This was what the Grand Royal Hotel was supposed to be. Not just a place for certain people to stay, but a place where everyone could feel welcome and valued. David's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "The documentary crew wants to schedule the final interview next week. They say the Grand Royal story is exactly what the country needs to hear right now." David smiled as he read the message. A national television network was producing a documentary about discrimination in American businesses and how it could be addressed. The Grand Royal had become their primary success story, proving that change was possible when leadership committed to doing the right thing. As David stepped outside into the cool evening air, he looked back at the hotel's golden sign. 6 months ago, those letters had seemed to mock him as he walked away in humiliation. Tonight, they represented something entirely different. Proof that one person's determination to fight injustice could create ripple effects that changed everything. The Grand Royal Hotel had become more than just a business success story. It had become a symbol of what was possible when power was used to lift people up rather than keep them out. And for David, that transformation was worth far more than the millions he'd spent to make it happen.